Hey guys, it's Skye Schooley here, a staff writer with business.com, and today we'll be talking about COVID. Yes, so as an employer, you've probably gotten a bit of whiplash over the past couple of years in regards to navigating COVID vaccines and testing and all kinds of policies in the workplace. So today I'm joined by Fernanda Anzek, the Managing Director of HR and DEI Services with Insperity, to talk about what some of the most recent policies are and how you can navigate them in the workplace to avoid employee friction. Hi, Fernanda. Thank you so much for joining me today to speak about the ever-changing regulations regarding the pandemic. So we know that the Supreme Court has ruled against the vax and test policy on a national level for some employers, but are there any other city or state laws similar to this that employers should still take note of?
The short answer is yes, absolutely. There are state and city and local legislation on the topic of vaccine. But before I talk about that a little bit, I want to go back and talk about a federal mandate that is in place right now, important for everybody to know, and that's for healthcare workers. So the CMS, which is the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, does have a current federal mandate for vaccines. It is, I believe, folks need to be vaccinated by February 28th, so fast approaching deadline there. It does not have a testing option, so it is what I call a strict mandate. There are accommodations that you must provide for sincerely held religious beliefs and medical accommodations, which are the two that we've seen throughout this process of mandating vaccines as well. So that is in play right now for your healthcare workers, and lots of great information out there on government sites to learn more about that. But to get back to the question, yes, there are many states and cities and even local legislation on the topic. One that comes to mind is New York City, probably one of the most stringent ones that I've seen, but currently in play right now. New York City does have a vaccine mandate. It is for both inside workers and outside workers. It is, again, what I call a true mandate, so there's no testing option with it. There's some pretty high penalties associated. There's even employer actions. I believe employers have to complete a certificate affirming that they have complied, and they have to post that publicly. And they also have to have it available upon request of inspections. So lots of little nuances there. Again, a little bit maybe on the more strict side in New York City right now. And like I said, fairly large penalties. So important to be paying attention to what's going on out there. On the other end of the spectrum, for example, you've got, I will say Texas, my home state, where the governor does have an executive order he put out in 2021, which is still in effect, where businesses are not allowed to have that strict mandate, like I mentioned earlier, where if you're going to mandate, you're going to have a testing policy with it as well, or option, I should say. And a little bit different on there is that it does have the religious accommodations and the, or require, I should say, or the medical. But Texas also said that there are accommodations need to be made for anybody who objects to the vaccine for any reasons of personal conscience. So again, those are just two examples. The reality is there are a lot of different legislation on there, and it is changing rapidly. Some of this information I just shared with you may be outdated by this afternoon. So it's important to just stay up to date with what's going on where you have employees.
Interesting. A lot of information. So if an employer is legally allowed to implement some sort of vaccine or vaccine test policy, do you have any advice for how they can go about doing this in the best way? This is for implementation and managing in general.
Sure. And yes, it is a lot of information, as you mentioned. So we'll always recommend that you work with an HR professional or legal counsel as you're working through this very complex topic. But yes, as an employer, a couple of simple steps that I can think of to follow if you are ready to think about a mandate policy or one with testing, depending on your location. A good way to start is with an anonymous survey. And that may be surprising, but it's just a great way to just figure out who is vaccinated and who isn't. So what is your population that you're working with? That's really going to give you the right information for your business on what type of policy do I want? You can consider if you've got, 90% of your population vaccinated already, you may reconsider that. If you have 50% and you're thinking about testing, and am I going to pay for tests and make it available? Is it required where I'm located? That can give you that information. I do say anonymous because it is important to really stick to that yes or no question and not dig further into why are you not, what are your beliefs around that, the vaccine. So anonymous is the best way to go if you can find a survey engine that can do that for you, just a simple yes or no. So that's a great first step in gathering that information. Second, I would say, and I'm going to sound like a broken record probably here, but it's checking your state and local policies to see what are my restrictions, what can I do, what can I not do, so that I can make sure that I am within those boundaries. Once you've done that, this is time to work on your policy. And I would say hand in hand, it's working on your policy and working on your communication strategy. And I say that because as you set dates for when you want your employees to be vaccinated, you want to give them enough time, and you want to give enough time for that communication to flow through and for folks to be able to go get vaccinated. Depending where you are, it may be more readily available, may not, so you want to make sure to give folks that time. When it comes to the policy, there are several pieces that need to be in a policy. And again, that's going to depend on what is the requirements by the law where your employees are located. A couple of things that come to mind that are important, but definitely not all inclusive, is you want to make sure you're very specific about who does it apply to. Is it your entire employee population? Is it certain departments? Is it part-time versus full-time? What does that look like? You want to be very, very clear to your employees. You also want to make sure that you're mentioning the confidentiality of the records. You want to make sure you're talking about the accommodations that are required and what are the steps to request those accommodations. So lots of little pieces that are really important to be in that policy in order to protect your business in that time. And then with that is the communication plan and the rollout. And then not only how am I going to give them enough time, as I mentioned, but what is going to be the ongoing communication as well, making sure that you're planning for that.
So we know that it's not surprising that some employers have been met with some upset employees, unhappy employees with implementing these type of policies. Do you have any advice for how employers can manage friction among employees in these type of instances?
Sure. I think that this has been one, like you said, not surprising. There's been a lot of topics in the past 2 years that have had some strong emotions tied to them. So, I think first and foremost is just ensuring you've got that open door policy. And that probably sounds like your basic 101 HR answer, but the reality is that is going to be the best way to protect yourself and your employees and ensure that things are not escalating outside of your four walls. If employees are coming forward because you have a open door policy and they're having communication with their leaders, it is going to take time. But at the end of the day, if you can resolve those internally, that's the success, right? So making sure you're not looking at that as, oh my gosh, it's just taking so much of our time to even answer questions. That's the reality, the uncertainty we're living in. If you've got folks coming forward and you're able to resolve it, that's where you want. That means you have a successful open door policy. So when I say open door policy, make sure your supervisors and managers are trained to make sure they know how to respond. Make sure that when folks do come with them with those maybe more emotional conversations, doing a lot of training on it is okay to have candid, but yet candid conversations with your employee. It is important to make sure that you do adhere to the policy, but the policy requires accommodation. So inevitably, you're going to have these conversations with your employees. And again, if you have that open door policy where they know who to go to and those things are being addressed consistently, they're going to help really reduce some of that friction.
Awesome. So before we wrap up here today, do you have any final advice for employers navigating vaccine policies, employee friction, and workplace safety?
Sure. So like we mentioned earlier, it is a lot and it's very complex. So make sure that you have great partners, whether they're HR partners, they are legal professionals, the right folks are in the room. Don't make these decisions alone. And they are changing rapidly, the legislation is. I know in my 30-year career, I have never seen legislation change so fast. So it is important to have those partners also to make sure you're up to date. You might start talking about what you want to do. By the time you're ready to execute, things may have changed. So you want to consistently have those partners throughout this conversation. So don't do it alone would be a big piece of advice. The other one is communication. So what we see a lot is great plans for communication up front, where there is just such a great strategy. Who's going to communicate it? What's the timing? Making sure everybody's hearing from their leaders at the right time and they're not surprised. However, what does that ongoing communication look like? So things are changing rapidly, as we've mentioned several times, and every time things change, your employees, they're getting buzzed, right? They're getting, their phone is buzzing with the latest update. You know, we need to mask, we don't need to mask, this is required, this is not required. And so every time that comes up, they're wondering, what does that mean for me? And what does that mean for me and my employer? So making sure you have that consistent open communication, whether you have regular town halls together, regular trainings, whatever that looks like, to make sure, and again, that open door, that communication is constantly flowing to your employees and that you're filling in that gap for them and not allowing them to fill in the gap with information that they may have.
Great insight. Well, that was all that we had for today, Fernanda. Thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's my pleasure.